Hello, everyone. It's Monday again. So today's our Mondays with Mallory, and I'm here in my office, and I've been doing a little bit of research on additional train information that I want to share with you. We're going to talk about the OWar train that ran from Atlanta to Columbus, and the Nancy Hanks, which ran from Atlanta to Savannah. We're going to talk about Amtrak today and your available options from the Atlanta Brookwood station. Then something really fantasy like the Venice Simplon Orient Express. Some really neat, expensive information to share with you about that. Um, and then we're going to talk about careers in the railroad and how it's still a real viable industry. So, just wanted to tell you a little bit about the Atlanta and West Point Railroad. It was chartered in 1847 as the Atlanta LaGrange Railroad. The whole thing was completed in 1854, and it eventually became the CSX Railroad today. That is who it's owned by. CSX runs 21,000 route miles on the East Coast and through Canada. And just some little background information. This all started from the parent company, which was the Georgia Railroad and Banking Company. Um, the depot that we operate as a venue, I mentioned this before in my tour of the depot. That is not longtime Noonanites, people who have lived there their whole lives and they're in their 70s and 80s. That is not what they refer to as the depot. The depot that they were talking about was the main passenger depot, which was on Savannah Street. And it's since been demolished, but now, so it's been demolished, I think, since the 70s. And so we just have our little depot, which was primarily a freight depot, but it did have a very small passenger waiting area there. So the yes, passenger service ended in 1970. And so our rail line, which was from Atlanta to Columbus, it was, or possibly even West Point, it started in the morning, and it made two round trips. And it was called the OWar. So it was customary to name these trains and these lines after race horses, excuse me, after race horses. And so ours was called the OWar, which was a very famous red horse. He was also called Big Red. He was born in 1917. He died in 1947. And over 2,000 people paid their respects. He was the first horse to be embalmed and is today in the Kentucky Horse Park under a life-size statue. There's a major thoroughfare in Lexington called Man of War Boulevard. In 1948, Columbus, Atlanta, the Central of Georgia Railroad, 2 times a day round trip. So they named it for him because it was supposed to be fast. It was a racehorse. So the Atlanta train was called the Nancy Hanks, and that was named for a female mare horse who Atlanta to Savannah, also twice a day. It 48 miles an hour. I think it made 12 stops. And it was 293 miles in 6 hours. It left the Central of Georgia Depot in Savannah daily at 7 a.m. It stopped in Macon for 5 minutes, and then it returned to Atlanta Terminal Station at 6 p.m. Yeah, so I'm sorry. It got there a lot. It had like it got there at 12:05. So it took like right at 5 hours and left Atlanta at 6 p.m. to be back in Savannah. It was kind of fancy. They were both had a grill, and I think at one point they even had a bar car. It made that round trip twice a day, and then demand was lessened, so it was just once a day. But I'm going to tell you about Nancy Hanks. Okay, so Nancy Hanks was a racehorse named for Abraham Lincoln's mother. And so Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky. And so this is the only reason that I can find that they named this racehorse after Abraham Lincoln's mother, and that is because they just wanted to honor a Kentucky mom. So you can still do. Oh yeah, let me tell you about Nancy Hanks. She was undefeated. This is the interesting part about the racehorse. She was standard-bred trotting mare. She was the first trotter in harness racing history. She was foaled in 1886 at Poplar Hill Farm in Lexington, Kentucky. She was undefeated in her races and inducted into the Harness Racing Museum Hall of Fame. After her fame was established, she was purchased by Malcolm Forbes of Boston for $45,000 in 1892. That's how much she was purchased for $45,000. She made him $90,000. So he retired her after that. She was 29 when she died, and she's buried in Hamburg Place Equine Cemetery. So I just think that's kind of interesting that they name these trains after these racehorses. So you can, if you wanted to take a train trip, you could do that from Atlanta Brookwood Station. It's a very old train station. It is on Peachtree, where kind of where 85 and 75 make the split. You know, they connect together in downtown Atlanta, and then they split north and south of downtown. And Brookwood Station is right there. You can go to New Orleans. It leaves at 8:38 in the morning, or you could go to Washington, D.C. And that, I believe, leaves in the evening. So there are a couple of different types of seating arrangements there. You can just sit in the standard coach, or you can get a little mini room, mini cabin. And I have actually done that. I've taken that trip to Savannah. It was kind of fun. Food, so it was okay. But it's just kind of neat to see that. I think it would be really great to go to Washington, D.C., and it does end up being cheaper than flying most of the time. So the really glamorous part that I want to get into is the Venice Simplon Orient Express. This was an old railroad company that only operates in Europe, of course. And they don't just do that Paris to Istanbul trip anymore, or London. They're all over Europe, and they've since gotten into river barge cruising and things like that. But the Paris to Istanbul run there is only done once a year. This year in Paris, it starts at August 28th. It's a 5-day trip, and it ends up in Istanbul. And then they do the return trip. So you should do yourself a favor and go on there and look at their website and the cabins and what they look like. So let me just tell you the itinerary for that once a year 5-day trip. Okay, so the first day is in Paris. And the second day, and you ride, you get on the train about mid-afternoon, get ready for dinner, and then the second day you're already in Budapest, but you get off the train and spend the night in a fancy hotel. You still have lunch and dinner there. The third day, you're in Budapest for the day. You cruise along the Danube. You have a late afternoon. You're back on track, back on the train to go into Romania. Day 4 is Bucharest. So you spend the night on that third day on the train. So day 4, you're in Bucharest. You take a tour of Palace Castle. You have dinner in a private venue in Bucharest, and you spend the night there. So day 5, you are traveling through Bulgaria. It's the final night on the train. Day 6, you enter into Turkey, and you have lunch. That's your last meal there. It's a Turkish lunch, and then you disembark in Istanbul. So the trains themselves are beautiful. There are cabins. There are, smaller cabins going up to these grand cabins. So here's some pricing for you. First of all, it includes all your meals and all of your hotel bills at these various places in Bucharest and Budapest. And but I don't think it includes any type of bar service. So the Grand Suite, this is the highest that you can get, $55,000 per person, but that's in British pounds. So the exchange rate is 1.22, so it's actually $67,000 for one person to do this 5-day trip. And then there are other there's a cabin suite that's £30,000. You can do the math with that, the exchange rate being 1.22. There are other smaller trips that you can take, though, that are just one-night things. They're like £2,200. So that works out to be close to $3,000 per person. But but it's just really glamorous. And of course, you would want to watch the movie before you took that trip. And it's Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, which I think, though, actually, that they started in London and not Paris. But so this was about a year ago. I was talking with this good friend of mine, and we were just getting caught up in person. We weren't on our phones or anything like that. And we were discussing her son, who had just graduated from high school. And I said, "What are his plans? What's he interested in?" And she said, "He's always been interested in the railroad." And I was like, "Really? That's great. I think that's wonderful." So less than 6 hours later, I'm on Facebook, and this little ad pops up for Coastal Pines Technical College in Waycross. And it's an ad that says, "The railroads are hiring, up to $10,000 signing bonus." I just thought that was really weird. Your phone is listening to you. So I just felt that was a sign. So I called this college down in Waycross, and I talked to this guy for a long time. And they offer 1-degree program, diplomas, and a certificate. But he informed me that actually, if you wanted to be an engineer, that you did not need any type of education for that. The railroad trains you, and they do give you a bonus. He also said, though, that they were, and anytime they have decreased demand for their services, that the engineers are the first people to be laid off, but then they're also the first people to be hired when they start back up again, moving goods across the nation. So, so the degree that they are offering, this is what it says: TCCs are tuition free using the Hope Career Grant. So that's kind of interesting. So the degree program is Railroad Systems Management degree. I think that's a logistics and a safety degree. And then they have various mechanical diplomas and certificates. But it's in Waycross. But you can do a lot of stuff online and then just take a few courses in Waycross if you need to be there in person. So I thought that was just really interesting. The railroad is still, even with all that we have going on today with electric cars and solar this and solar that, the railroad is still an extremely efficient way to move our goods across the country. And hope you have a good time looking over that Venice Simplon Orient Express website and planning your fantasy trip. Thanks. Bye.